So today we're hopefully getting through the rest of chapter 11 in John, because we're closing for the summer after this study, so hopefully we can get through the remaining few verses. So, chapter 11, resurrection of Lazarus. Lazarus was sick. Jesus intentionally stayed behind. Lazarus died. Jesus went, comforted mourners, raised Lazarus from the dead, and then you get a messenger going off, or messengers, I should say, some of the Jews going off to tell the Pharisees. The Pharisees get the Sanhedrin together, or at least an informal gathering. We don't know if it's formal or informal. And they're discussing this amongst themselves, especially with the importance that Jesus would have over people. Because from what they're saying, it sounds like they believe that the entire nation would follow Jesus if he could raise people from the dead. For them, they're more worried about military insurgents. That Jesus would actually claim political power instead of theological power and make himself king, at which point people would probably be somewhat more encouraged to fight if they believed you could be raised from the dead. Just Jesus would be behind and then do something like Elijah, where you have the Valley of Dry Bones. Just try fighting that. But who knows? We're going to get into the text a little bit. We're going to have a bit of a reminder of what's going on in context. So, could somebody please read John chapter 11, verses 47 to 53?
Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. "What are we accomplishing?" they asked. "Here is this man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up. "You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it's better for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish." He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Therefore, Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the Jews. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the desert, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples.
Yeah, you can come out there. Okay. So last week we were talking more specifically about the high priest. Even got to talk about, well, who on earth is this high priest? Well, the high priest is basically the head of Israel. Because if you don't have a political figure acting as king, or acting as the head prophet, much as Moses was, then the de facto leader of the people would be the high priest, because they're the ones in charge of the spiritual health of the entire nation. They're the only ones who are designated as the representative of the nation before God. So the high priest had a lot of political clout because of this, but more importantly, he was the theological figure in the entire nation of Israel. So Caiaphas, quite important, and he can probably settle matters within the group here. Now, we're going to be looking into the prophecy today. What does it mean that he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation? Because John is actually declaring that this is something true that the high priest is saying. So Caiaphas, you can try and argue that he might know what he was actually saying, but more than likely not, since well, John doesn't really have a sweeping portrayal of him in this gospel. Because John, when we come to the trials of Jesus Christ, he's going to focus on Annas. The former high priest who was deposed by the Romans, and then Caiaphas was raised up by the Romans, appointed by the Romans. So John's going to focus more on Annas. He's just kind of going to blip by Caiaphas a little bit. But when you get into the trial scenes in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Caiaphas is the one who's actually trying Jesus in the Sanhedrin before he palms him off to Pontius Pilate, and Pontius Pilate tries to palm him off to Herod, and then Herod sends it back to Pontius Pilate, and Pontius Pilate tries to bring it back to the people, and people go, no, crucify him. So Caiaphas, he's the one presiding over the trial. Various witnesses are being brought forth. The general commentary from the gospel writers is the witnesses, they can't agree on their own testimony. There is one place where people are saying, like, oh, Jesus proclaimed that the temple would be destroyed and he would rebuild it in 3 days. And then John kind of elaborates on that, of course. But the condemnatory speech that Jesus has as an interchange with the high priest in Matthew 14, I'll very quickly show the people what's going on there. I like going to the Mark one because it has a little bit more explanation to it than some of the other accounts of this anyways.
Did you say Mark or Matthew?
Mark. Go to Matthew 14, and you're not even going to be close to the trial. But in Mark chapter 14, I'll very quickly go through this. So, beginning of verse 53. So they took Jesus.
Verse
This
what?
is 53.
Thank you.
So this is right after the Garden of Gethsemane. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and teachers of the law came together. So again, Sanhedrin. Peter followed him in the distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. Then some stood up and gave this false testimony against him. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with human hands, in 3 days will build another not made with hands. Even then, their testimony did not agree. Then the high priest stood up, so this is Caiaphas, stood up before them and asked Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? I am, said Jesus. And you will see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. The high priest tore his robes. Why do we need any more witnesses? He asked. You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with fists, and said, prophesy. And the guards took him and beat him. So does it sound like Caiaphas is willing to give Jesus the benefit of the doubt there?
No.
No. So he basically comes straight out and asks him, like, are you claiming to be the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? So are you claiming to be who we're accusing you to be here in John chapter 11, which is, are you claiming to be the Messianic King of the nation of Israel? So with this, the high priest could confirm what they already decided maybe a month ago. He's going to try and raise a rebellion against Rome. But Jesus actually does him one better, where he says, I am, kind of the emphatic I am, and he says, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming up the clouds of heaven. So that's actually a reference to Daniel chapter 7, the prophecy in Daniel chapter 7, where there is one like the Son of Man who is next to the Ancient of Days, who is bringing about the last judgment and has authority over the heavens and the earth to make the last judgment. So essentially, he's claiming to be God. And that's exactly what the high priest is saying. He's saying, you have heard the blasphemy. So he's not just saying, oh, like, yeah, Messiah is kind of a dime a dozen sometimes, depending on what period of history you're at. People claim, oh, I can do this. But Jesus is now saying, yeah, I'm God. So Caiaphas condemns him and gets the consensus from the Sanhedrin to condemn him. So no, it doesn't sound like flipping back to John chapter 11. It doesn't sound like Caiaphas is going to believe what Jesus says, nor does it sound like he's thinking, oh, well, Jesus will save the entire nation spiritually if he dies for the people. No, he wants to stop the political action of the Romans should a new insurgency of a Messiah should arise. And then also, of course, the Sanhedrin in general, who are more concerned with their own place at the temple in Jerusalem and in the nation.
In Mark, where he's talking about, we will destroy the temple. The temple is made with hands. Was he not referring to his body?
Yeah.
Coming back to life in 3 days.
Yep.
Made with hands, that's kind of an odd way of saying how the body was made with hands.
Without hands.
Destroy the temple that is made with hands. And in 3 days I will build another.
Without hands.
But my Bible says.
Yeah. So Mark has the comment on their false testimony.
Oh.
Yeah. So if we're bringing it up in John chapter 2, let's quickly flip over that. John is trying to remove the confusion about this. Where chapter 2, John, verse 19. So Jesus answered them, you will destroy this temple and I will raise it again in 3 days. So he's not speaking to the temple built by Herod, the big magnificent temple in the background. He's referring to specifically his own body. So Jesus isn't saying, I'm going to destroy the Herod's temple and then make one without hands, so the heavenly temple coming down. He's only referring to his body.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's what Mark is trying to say. It's like, yeah, they're making this accusation, but their testimony can't even agree. They don't know what's going on. So yes, confusion all that.
They added words that Jesus was supposedly have said but didn't say.
They had their own interpretation of what he said. So they're giving that interpretation instead of actually knowing what Jesus Christ said. But for Caiaphas, I just want to write the name of these things on the board. For Caiaphas, as the high priest giving prophecy, like there's one way that I can envision it happening that's very legitimate coming from God, not just Caiaphas saying something, but him actually making a God-pleasing decision that Jesus Christ should die. So how many high priests do you know in the Bible have made prophecies?
Zechariah?
Zechariah was, well,
Father of
I
John?
don't think he was the high priest, and he
okay.
was. I know there's a little bit of debate about that. I would consider him to be the high priest. He was offering incense. Not the devil. John the Baptist died.
Can't think of anybody else.
Yeah. So you could sort of say Aaron, because Aaron was doing some stuff, but God's mouthpiece was more Moses, and then Moses would speak and say that to Aaron, and then Aaron would speak. So Aaron sort of gave some prophecy, but that wasn't expected of the high priest. The only one that I can really think of that did prophesy and did so accurately would be Eli. Who on earth is that? He appears in the first few chapters of 1 Samuel, and he speaks to Hannah. And you go like, who's Hannah? She's the mother of Samuel, so she was at the tabernacle and she was praying quite fervently that God would grant her a son. And Eli heard her, and Eli was not a good high priest. He died because of that. But he heard her speaking, and he thought that she was drunk. So then he's like, "Get up, you drunk, go away." And then she's like, "I'm not drunk. I want a son by the Lord." And he's like, "Oh, okay. Then may it be unto you as you have asked." And then she went away and eventually had Samuel, who then later served under Eli. And once Eli died, Samuel kind of took over some of the direction of the tabernacle, worship at the tabernacle. But this doesn't really happen that often. Not like the prophets, who are usually not priests. Usually not. There are some who are priests. Ezekiel, for example, he was a priest. So there's there. Okay. I blanked on the spelling for a second. So there's these things called the Urim and Thummim that priests have.
What?
Urim and Thummim.
What did you say after that?
These are things the priests have.
Oh, okay.
So, as part of the priestly regalia, you have a breastpiece, and behind the breastpiece is supposed to be a little pocket where the Urim and Thummim are, and these are stones. What do these stones look like? I don't know. The Bible doesn't give a lot of description on that. There's some suggestions that maybe one was painted white, one was painted black, so you know which was which. But basically you have two stones. And if you go to a priest to divine an answer from God, they would go into the pocket, take out a stone, and it would be either the Urim or the Thummim. Or, sorry, those are plural, so, but one of the Urim or Thummim. And based on which one they pull, that would be the answer. So it could be something as simple as yes, no, but we're not given the details specifically. However, God was allowing them to do this sort of thing. So this is kind of a more basic version of casting lots. So if you have a yes, no type of answer or question, then you can pull out an answer, and this would be what you would do. So Caiaphas, as the high priest, he might have actually used this. It's not explicit in the text. I'm just saying this is the method he could have possibly used as a priest in the nation of Israel. And if he decided to put an end to this, and if he actually acted like a proper priest, he would go, well, this is the question we have for you, O God. Pulls out a stone, goes, aha, so it is better for this one man to die on behalf of the entire nation, and then for the entire nation to perish.
When I read this, it kind of goes back to the previous sentence, and it's like, well, if Jesus is killed, then we're protected from the Romans more than from spiritual death.
Yeah, so that they're not thinking spiritually about this at all.
Okay.
But it's not unreasonable to think maybe they use this particular method. I'm just bringing it up, but they might have used this particular method to think through a political issue. Because if you think about how often you pray, oh, please, Lord, let so-and-so win the election, or this sporting event, and then if people on the other side go like, please, Lord, let my team win this. Anyway, it is up to God how these things go. But that's my guess for a legitimate prophecy from the high priest in this situation. Now, he doesn't necessarily know why Jesus should die, because he's going from a very political motive. So Caiaphas is probably not thinking, oh, we need to save the people from their sins. And since at the final trial, Jesus, with Caiaphas presiding, and Jesus is saying, no, I'm basically the Son of Man, I'm God in the flesh. The people and the high priest tears his robes and casts him out to be killed. Yeah, the high priest isn't seeing this as divine intervention. He wants Jesus just to die. Okay. So when John makes comments in verse 51, he did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. John could actually be saying, like, no, this is a true prophecy. It's just that the guy had no idea what he was saying, which happens from time to time, even in the Old Testament. People don't realize what should be happening in them. Now, for the people on the screen, I don't think it's in this. Oh no, it is in the NIV. Okay, so everybody with the NIV. There's the word Jewish nation, that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation. Yeah, that's not in the original text. The original text just says nation. So the NIV is saying, like, no, specifically they're referring to, in the singular, the Jewish nation, which you actually get more from reading the next verse, and not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together to make them one. So, okay. What other nations could there be?
The rest of the world?
There you go. Yes.
Gentiles.
Yeah. So it sounds like John is making it explicit that this isn't just for the Jewish people that Jesus is dying for, because the Sanhedrin here, they're very much concerned with the Jewish people. And they're trying to have Jesus die for this nation. But John is saying, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So it sounds like John is saying that there are legitimate followers of Christ, or that would be followers of Christ, because they still need the gospel given to them, of course. But not just in the Jews, but in the various nations of the world. Which is a very interesting statement to make, as somebody who is Jewish himself. John being Jewish, because the Israelites think that they're God's chosen people, that they're descendants of Abraham, that they're children of God, etc., etc. But it goes beyond this, because, well, if other people can be called children of God in other nations, then that means that it isn't just limited to the Jewish people. Ethnicity, as the ethnicity tends to be dominant more, it's getting more to be dominant at this point in time. but we're looking more towards the spiritual aspect of becoming a child of God, which is something that John the Baptist was paving the way for, as well as Jesus. So when Pharisees and other people were coming to John to be baptized, John is saying, like, who told you snakes, or no, sorry, brood of serpents, that you could escape the judgment that's coming? And don't say that you're children of Abraham, kind of referring to your entitlement to salvation, because God could raise up children of Abraham from these rocks over here. So John's not very picky about who's coming in, as long as they're actually becoming part of the Israel of faith, if you will. And Jesus is also making that point earlier in John chapter 8, where he's talking about how the people around him are not sons of Abraham, but they're sons of Satan, because they're trying to kill the Messiah. But the children of Abraham are those whom the Son, God's Son, frees from slavery to sin to be children of God. And then Paul develops this further in some of his letters. But this is kind of a new concept. If you will, this is kind of an early hint towards what we might call the spiritual Israel, as opposed to the ethnic Israel. All very comfortable with this. I thought we had more notes on that specifically, but oh. Anyways, so verse 53, from that day on, they plotted to take his life. I mentioned last week that there was something called a baraita. A baraita is something outside, literally that's what it means, outside of the accepted canon within Jewish literature. So the actual canon would be the Tanakh, which is the Old Testament along with the Apocrypha. There's the Mishnah, which is the commentary, rabbinic commentary on the Tanakh. And then there's the Talmud. Talmud is commentary on the Mishnah. So Talmud won't come for a few hundred years. Mishnah has not yet been collected. That kind of happens more in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So this Baraita would have appeared after the time of Jesus, but not accepted in the Mishnah. Yay, Jewish turns. Anyways, with the Baraita, there is a claim that Jesus was condemned prior to, like 40 days prior to when he was actually killed. And basically a representative of the Sanhedrin was going around Jerusalem and possibly the surrounding area, declaring that Jesus, if you know where Jesus is, if you know this guy, you have to report him so that we can stone him. So could possibly be legitimate. A legitimate portrayal of what happened, might not be, so who knows. But we do have confirmation even from the Jews that they were plotting to take Jesus' life a decent time before he actually went to the cross. Okay. So, verse 54, therefore Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the people of Israel, of Judea. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the wilderness, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. So, at some point, Jesus learned that there was a plot against his life.
Being God, he would have known anyway, right?
Probably, but usually he doesn't just use his omniscience like that. Usually he waits for these things to be announced. It's
but he
also
kept
possible that he decided that after the resurrection of Lazarus, that it would people would be more out to kill him because he's been declaring for the past 6 months or so that actually even longer than that, sorry, year or so, that people were actually seeking his life in Jerusalem.
But he often said, my time has not yet come. And then finally he said, the time has come. So he must have known.
When he would die, but
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean that he knew about this particular event, is what I'm saying. But he knows when he's going to die. He knows that particular event and all the events leading up to it. We don't know if he's using his divine omniscience to go into every single one. At least he's not making that known to us.
I don't see Ephraim on any of my maps in my Bible.
Nope.
Is it like a really small?
Probably, yes. So, so Ephraim, according to what I could find, is about 20 kilometers northeast of Bethel. So Bethel is also outside of Jerusalem. So it's a decent way away from Jerusalem, and let's say maybe a day's journey thereabouts or more. But I don't know where exactly. It's very small.
I really don't know why the people were so threatened by Jesus. He didn't do anything wrong. He never hurt anyone. He only did good. Was it partly jealousy, partly they didn't want him to get the acclaim for what he did, or
Well,
were afraid he's going to take over reigning the world, or
within this specific context, the Sanhedrin is concerned that Jesus is raising a rebellion against the Roman Empire as the messianic king. So if there is a backlash from the Roman government, then the Roman legions, or whatever forces that they have stationed in that area thereabouts, will come in and destroy the nation. So the historical precedent for this, I believe I mentioned this last week, was there was a rebellion around the death of King Herod the Great. So King Herod died not too long after Jesus Christ was born. Jesus and his family escaped to Egypt because Herod was trying to kill him. But when Herod died, there was somebody who claimed to be a Messiah and led a rebellion. And then because Herod was also the representative of the Roman government in that area. So Herod was a client king in that area. But Rome had control of the area. Herod was allowed to rule, and he did it very well, or at least according to Roman standards. He was absolutely a jerk and a monster, but he knew how to keep power. Anyways, so upon his death, rebellion, somebody claiming to be a king from the people, and the Roman government came in from the neighboring province, and they had to kill a whole bunch of people, and there was 2,000 crucified. So there's historical precedent for this, and if we look to other things related to the history, so not within their knowledge of this, but later on in 66 to 71 AD, there was the Jewish War, where you had the Jews rebelling against the Roman government. And then the Romans, they basically took over the entire region of Palestine, even more than they already had, killing tons of people and wiping Jerusalem off the face of the earth practically. So that's exactly what the Sanhedrin is afraid of, from a political perspective. But from a theological perspective, they're also concerned because they're believing that Jesus Christ is speaking heresy. So if you look to some of the Jewish sources and Jewish portrayals of Jesus, they're all saying that he's practicing witchcraft. So they're admitting that he's doing miracles among them, but they're saying that it has something to do with witchcraft. This even comes up in the other gospels where people are calling Jesus Beelzebul, the Lord of Flies, because he is casting out demons by the power of demons.
When you think of it though, like everything was a day's journey away. And just, I mean, nowadays information goes back and forth instantly almost, but for people to find out about what Jesus was doing and for it to spread, I mean, it took somebody walking for a day or two to get to the next place to tell that message.
Also, but keep in mind that there's no television, no movies, no play, well, except if you're in some of the Greek territories, then you got some plays. But there's no entertainment system, so what are you going to do in all these small towns?
The talk.
You're going to go.
Yeah, that's true.
Hey, so that's how we're going to do this.
But I mean, just getting from one place to the other.
Mhm. Yeah. But that's also why traveling merchants were decently important. Now, you wouldn't necessarily need a ton of those people because pretty much everything you need to make, you can make at home in that era. So if you need clothing, you could eventually produce some clothing. If you have food, well, most people are supposed to be agrarian, so they're going to make that. So if you need something a little bit more complex, let's say like a house built, then you go to a carpenter like Joseph. But merchants, if you're moving along, if you want to get the fish out of Galilee to some of the surrounding towns, then you have a merchant. And merchants would be popular in the sense that, hey, what's all that news at the next town over? Because again, before newspapers or anything of the sort.
Yeah.
Incidentally, this is also why minstrels and other people of that sort were incredibly valuable in the Middle Ages, because yeah, they give you a play in your castle or whatever, right? But they also just came from another town, and then they could tell you everything about that town.
I guess the worlds were pretty small, so it gave us something to talk about. It's not like today where we know what's going on all over the world.
Well, this is also why it was important for Jesus to go to Jerusalem, and John's gospel is focusing more on Jesus' ministry in Jerusalem. The other gospels focus more on stages of his journey, moving from Galilee to the northern tribe areas, and then kind of more to Judea at the end. John really focuses more on the specific festivals of the year where Jesus has to come to Jerusalem, because you're supposed to come to Jerusalem for specific festivals during the year. So if Jesus is making public speeches there, like in at the temple, where you have Jews coming from all over the world, news can spread all over the place pretty fast once those people get back home.
Or even on their way back home, they would stop at some sort of inn for the night.
Some of the people in the inn might not care unless they're Jews. Yeah, because if you're talking to a Gentile nation about the Messiah, they're going, "Why are you talking about this?" And it's like, "Why do I care about the Messiah for the Jews necessarily?" And then you tell them, well, not all the Jews believe this, but if you tell them that the Messiah is the Son of God, then the Gentiles would start caring, because they still believe in that type of thing. Like, oh, we have a God here. Okay, oh, this is Messiah for one nation on the earth. They don't. Oh yeah, so that was also the importance with the Magi at Jesus Christ's birth, because they were going to where there was a divinely appointed king. That's what they cared about. Like it was just if it was just an ordinary king that you'd have anywhere, like maybe they would care about it. But they came because they saw the sun in the sky, the star. They're like, oh, okay, this is going to be a very important king. This is linked to God somehow. So then they came. Yeah. Anyway, so Ephraim, the more important words to draw out there would be the wilderness. So going into the wilderness again, it's kind of out there. It also promotes sort of the hiddenness of things, which is also Jesus no longer moved about publicly. So he wasn't open, and that's the double meaning of the word is you proclaim things publicly, or you openly you proclaim things, or you understandably proclaim things. People actually know what on earth you're saying. You're not using abstract metaphors or anything of the sort. So Jesus is no longer moving publicly among people, which kind of goes against his ministry as far as promoted by John, or even promoted by Jesus, because when Jesus is brought before Annas, Jesus says, everything I taught publicly. Why you can ask everybody about what I said, why are you asking me? So this is going against what Jesus normally does by trying to be hidden until the appointed time.
How much time was there between Lazarus and?
Hard to say. If the Baraita is correct, then it would be of 40 days before, like in between the announced decision by the Sanhedrin and the actual crucifixion. If that is correct. However, it could also be as short as a little over a week, because the next event that's actually timed comes up, first verse, chapter 12, where it says 6 days before the Passover, Jesus arrived at Bethany. So this is basically the Saturday, so the Sabbath day. So Jesus came to Bethany, and of course he rested on the Sabbath, so he's there on Saturday. And then he moves out on the Sunday, so the next day, and that's the triumphal entry. So possibly he's goes to Ephraim a week before this, but you would assume that you spent a number of days there, so maybe 10. We don't know for sure. So it depends on this extra biblical source being correct, and I'm not necessarily in favor of that. Because it's an extra biblical source which isn't even included in other people's sacred texts, so they don't even put that much stock into it. So a month and a half to a couple of weeks. Somewhere in there. All right. Oh, yes. Also want to put out a possible conspiracy theory where Jesus, if he knew about the Pharisaical plot against his life, this could possibly have gotten to him by way of Nicodemus. I just want to throw that out there as a possibility. Because Nicodemus is one of the Pharisees. He was in a gathering of the Pharisees at the temple back in John chapter 7. So if he's among them at this time, he could possibly try to have sent word to Jesus to try and warn him to get out of Dodge. Who knows? Probably ask Nicodemus himself what he did when I get to heaven and see him, but I don't know. Oh, right. That was the other thing. So when Jesus no longer moved about publicly, so he was no longer walking about. So he's no longer regularly walking about. The imperfect verb in Greek means that he's no longer regularly teaching. So it could possibly be that every once in a while he's saying, this is what I believe, this is what I'm teaching. And he might still be talking with a couple of people, but he's no longer doing this regularly. Then we get to the last 3 verses. Almost done. We're almost done. Okay, so we're suddenly back into time. So John is giving us a time marker where he's saying when it was almost time for the Jewish Passover. Many went up from the country to Jerusalem. So this is again kind of from the wilderness area. So they're coming up from the country, the wilderness, to Jerusalem for the ceremonial cleansing before the Passover. This is something I'm not terribly familiar with, to be quite honest. So I had to look this up or try to find information on it. So the purification is not a prescribed thing in the Old Testament. So this could be something more Pharisaical, where some people should think that they have to cleanse themselves. So go into ritual baths, the mikvahs, and cleanse themselves for ceremonies. And the Pharisees did that quite often. Groups like the Essenes were more isolationist groups, but they also regularly did this with everything. So the Essene community in Qumran, where I visited, you didn't go to Qumran.
I don't think,
Okay.
I don't think so.
Where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found?
Oh, yeah, we went, yeah, we did go with it, we saw
Okay.
the scrolls, yeah.
Oh, you saw the scrolls, or you saw where they were found?
We saw this, around the Dead Sea.
Oh,
area.
okay. Yeah. Okay. So then
I
you
don't
probably,
remember the names.
yeah, so you probably what?
Long time ago.
Well, if you didn't go onto the site, you drove by it at least.
Maybe.
But if you go into the site at Qumran, you can't really go a block. I mean, it's a much smaller block since they don't have that many people, but you can't really go to a corner without finding a mikvah somewhere, a ritual bath, because that was just how they did everything. Was you cleansed yourself so often. And this is very odd for people in that area where water is at a premium, but they're devoting a large part of their water supply to ritually cleansing themselves pretty much daily. So that was very much with Essenes. The Pharisees probably wouldn't have done something quite that drastic for themselves, but they would regularly cleanse themselves. So this could be what John is referring to, that some people were trying to do that ritual cleansing. The other possibility is that there could be some people who are ritually unclean at this point in time. How do you become ritually unclean? Well, you have to go to Leviticus chapter, there's 11 to 15, and you could be unclean for coming into contact with food or that you shouldn't have come into contact with, or animals who make that food you shouldn't have come into contact with, or Gentiles who ate unclean food which you shouldn't have come in contact with. You can also be unclean if you have a suspicious skin, what they would call a skin disease, infectious skin disease, or if you will, leprosy. if you have anything like that, you'd be ritually unclean, and you have to wait specific periods of time in order to be clean again, and you have to show yourself to the priest. You could also be unclean with certain fluids in the nuptial act, and then also with women who have gone through childbirth, because expulsion of blood is also something that would make you unclean. But basically anything that's supposed to give you life that's being misused, that makes you unclean. So fluids in the nuptial act and blood from the womb, those things would make you unclean. But anyways, so for people who are ritually unclean, they have to have themselves cleansed. And if you can have yourselves cleansed before the Passover, which is one of the major holy days in the Jewish calendar, there's 3 main ones that you have to be in Jerusalem for. Passover is one of the, sort of. Passover is one of the very, very important ones where you have to be in your own houses. But Passover is itself a very important holy day, so you want to make sure that you're able to actually come in for this. So there's a few days that you actually have to be in Jerusalem. Passover isn't exactly one of them, but a lot of people would be going to Jerusalem to be at the temple. So it's possible that people from the surrounding area, if from the wilderness specifically, if they don't have a Levitical priest around them to help them out, or if they don't have a mikvah around them, maybe they're coming to the big center of Jerusalem to be cleansed, so that they can go back and go into their own homes for the Passover, or maybe they just want to stay with family in Jerusalem for the Passover, be right next to the temple. Who knows? Okay. But ceremonial cleansing before the Passover. They kept looking for Jesus, or I think would be better translated as seeking, searching. They're searching for Jesus. And as they stood in the temple courts, they asked one another. I think it would be better translated as they were asking one another. So they were searching for and talking about. So this is a continuous activity that they're doing. They're always looking for Jesus. They're always talking about this. What do you think? Isn't he coming to the festival at all? See? Doesn't necessarily mean that they have. Yeah, so they're kind of curious, is this Jesus fellow going to make a public appearance as he has been quite often, or and the people at this time also know that there's a hit out on him, so they're also kind of wondering, is he actually going to make a public appearance? Like he complained about being targeted for execution before chapter 7. So is he going to make an appearance, and is he going to defy death yet again? Oh, yeah, and yeah, fun little thing. So the people were searching, moving around, they were talking, so they're going to and fro, asking one another about this. It was kind of public gossip at this time. But this is actually in contrast with standing in the temple courts. So that's actually a perfect participle, which is kind of saying, like, yeah, if you were in worship, you're in worship, you're not moving around anywhere. You're there. As opposed to when you're not in worship and then you're just making gross speculations and moving to and from. Well, yeah, so, but the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that anyone who found out where Jesus was should report it as so that they might arrest him. So this would also be why the people are talking, because they know that, yeah, again, there's a hit on Jesus, but the people might also be speculating. Are you going to report him? Are you going to get him arrested? What are we supposed to do? Much like the Pharisees were, when the imperfect verb for them, where they were asking, so they continuously asked among themselves, what are we accomplishing? Jesus is performing miracles. What's going to happen to us? So they're continuously asking these questions until Caiaphas basically gets them to stop and move forward. So the people themselves are also kind of questioning, could be questioning and wondering what they're going to be doing at this time if they see Jesus. We don't have an explicit word, they're questioning themselves. We don't know how many people would be opposed to Jesus at this time. Presumably there would actually be quite a few followers, because when we skip over to the next chapter with the triumphal entry, like there's a lot of people who are willing to follow Jesus from Bethany to Jerusalem. And then the people outside of Jerusalem are wondering what's going on. The people of Bethany tell them what's going on, and then they start praising Jesus. So Jesus could have a lot of potential followers, at least, in this area.
Pastor, do you think that when the chief priests and Pharisees had given the orders that anyone should find out, do you think at that time they offered a reward for anybody? You know, like a monetary award?
Well, we do know that they offered money to Judas. Judas kind of went to them and asked for money. So I don't know if they just said there's a possible reward.
I just wonder. Yeah.
Yeah, so hard to say. But Judas, who's also kind of having his hands in the disciples' purse, he might have just been using the money kind of as an excuse to go like, this is why I'm betraying Jesus. I did it for the money, kind of glossing over the fact that he's doing this because he's actually wicked.
Actually what?
Wicked.
Oh, right.
So Judas betrays him for money, and he's definitely in a position where he could barter a price for Jesus. So it could have just been offered to Judas. There could have just been some sort of generic call for reward. It's not mentioned in the Baraita that comes up. Again, not that I'm saying that Baraita is absolute, like 100% the truth, because we don't know. But possible. Oh, I should also mention. Pharisees had given orders. So Greek tense, flew perfect. So past action with an ongoing effect, which ends by the time of the speaker. So they had given orders that anyone who found out where Jesus was should report it, that they might arrest him. So at the time of the Passover, or around the time of the Passover, the preparation for the Passover, they had actually stopped asking. That's basically what it means. So the people knew what was going on, but the Pharisees had stopped making public declarations. This is what you should do, folks. It could actually be that they're not publicizing this during a major holy festival because they don't want to bring in any uncleanliness around them. But yeah, they had stopped asking around the time the Passover was beginning, around the time of the ceremonial cleansing. So orders were there, but they stopped actively asking people.
People weren't listening too well. I mean, it was a whole week that the whereabouts of Jesus was known, and it didn't seem anybody was reporting.
No to whom? And this is one of the little things where we might want some more data on what's going on, because Jesus was not moving around publicly, so we don't know. So John definitely knew. John definitely knew. He was one of the disciples. He was one of the guys who was following Jesus around to Ephraim, because it says he stayed there with his disciples. But if Jesus is no longer moving about publicly, like making public speeches, how many people know that he's in Ephraim?
I guess I'm looking ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
To Bethany. I mean, there was.
Oh yeah, in Bethany, then people
There's
know
whole
where it is.
weeks there between Bethany and the crucifixion. So
Well, so he's in Bethany at least by the Sabbath day, the Saturday.
yeah.
Triumphal entry. And we'll get into that next time, but or sometime in the future.
Like for days there that he could
Yeah,
have been reported. And
so you have so the Sabbath day you can't really make a move either, because you don't want to desecrate yourself, and you're also, if you're a Pharisee, you can't even move that far. You can't walk. One of the notes about Bethany is that it's the Sabbath day's journey from Jerusalem. So you can walk to Bethany, but you can't do anything while you're there because you used up all your steps. So you can't even bring them back to Jerusalem to execute. So you can't do anything. The Sunday, which is the triumphal entry, Jesus is surrounded by crowds of people who are supporting him, so you're not necessarily going to be making a move against him there. And then the Monday to Thursday, more or less, you have Jesus surrounded by crowds in the temple for the most part. Now you could theoretically nab him on the road, but again, he's traveling around with 12 guys, and you're like, can I really get him? So hard to say, but on the Wednesday, that's when Judas contacts the Pharisees and says, I can give you Jesus, what are you going to give me? And then they give him 30 silver coins. So the Pharisees already have a plan in place by Wednesday, so it's a little bit shorter than.
Are there several high priests?
There's one high priest. There can only be one high priest.
Because it said the chief priests.
Chief priest.
Chief priests. So is that different than the high priest?
Very much so. There can only be one high priest. If there's more than one high priest, that's very confusing. This is also why I was making a big deal last week about Annas versus Caiaphas. And when it comes up in chapter 18, when John a couple times actually calls Annas the high priest versus Caiaphas, who is the high priest that year. That's a big deal, because John is saying that there is a bit of confusion about this, but there can only be one high priest. There's only one. You can't have two. Chief priests would be any priest who would be high up. My guess would be more heads of households, so people who were kind of grandfathered in over time. So if you were an adult male Levite and you had no physical defects, if you go to Leviticus, there's stipulations about Levites who could be disbarred from service. Like one of them is like, if you have a scraggly beard, you can't be a priest. Yeah, you need a perfect beard in order to be a priest. Yeah, so basically, so you can't have any physical defects. The idea is that you have a perfect representation of humanity that's going before God in order to offer up sacrifices. Because similar with the lamb without defect, you can't have any defects, everything has to be perfect. This is also Jesus. He's at once priest and sacrifice. So he is the sacrifice without any defect, he's the priest without any defect. But any adult male Levite without physical defects can be a priest. So if you're the head of a household and you have children who are priests, I guess that could qualify you to be a chief priest, but I'm going to guess this is also more political than anything else. So I don't know all the specifics, unfortunately. But chief priest is definitely not high priest. High priest is just one guy.
And you had to be a male. There were no female priests.
There were none. Yeah. So this is, yeah, that's one of the carryovers also to Christendom, where when Paul talks about the priesthood or the Christian priesthood, and I use that term very loosely, because technically the Christian priesthood is fundamentally different than the ancient Levitical priesthood. But the Christian priesthood does have some of that carried over, where you do have a male representative, but instead of representing perfect humanity before God, we're now, like, the Christian priesthood is representing Christ. So if you have a priest going forward, that priest should be, at least in some qualifications, like Christ. But yeah, St. Paul does, as he says in 1 Timothy, forbids a woman to preach. But we also know that from St. Paul, that women could be deacons. Deacons are an administrative office, not a preaching office. So you can have deaconesses in the church, but you can't necessarily have female priests, female pastors, people in the preaching office. Now, doesn't necessarily mean that women aren't in the royal priesthood, the priesthood of all believers in the church, because all of us in the church don't need a mediator between us and God, because Jesus Christ is our mediator. So that's the point St. Peter is trying to make in 1 Peter chapter 2, is that everybody's in the royal priesthood. But Peter's also quoting, and this is what Peter does in his letter. Like, he partially quotes several things in one sentence. You're like, oh, this is so complicated. So yeah, if you think of Peter speaking to Jesus, and he's here, there, and everywhere in his thought in the Gospels, that's how he is in 1 Peter, is that he's bringing in a whole bunch of concepts and he's pushing them into one sentence, and you're like, oh, gee, Peter, why? But anyways, in his comments on the priesthood of all believers, he's drawing from a couple different sources in the Old Testament, one of which is calling the entire nation of ancient Israel the priesthood of all believers. So they're a nation of priests. But that doesn't mean that everybody gets to be a priest.
So would the disciples be priests?
I am aware of, I don't think any of them would actually fall under the qualifications of the Levitical priesthood, because I'm unaware of any of them being from the tribe of Levi, except for Matthew, possibly. Because Matthew is his, if you will, Christian name. Levi is his Hebrew name. So he could possibly be from the tribe of Levi, but he might just have the name Levi, and that's coincident. Given the areas where some of the disciples are from, like we know Peter's from Capernaum, he's from a completely different tribe than, he would be from a completely different tribe than the tribe of Levi. But yeah, we don't have any of them really being said to be from the tribe of Levi, which you need to be in order to be a priest. So when they become the apostles later on, where they're sent out as the leaders of the church, this is something very different. And if we're going by representation of the 12 tribes, because that's why you have 12 apostles, so to match the 12 tribes of ancient Israel. Most of them would be of theoretically would be from different tribes of the nation of Israel. Not for the ones who are brothers, obviously you can't do that. But yeah, they're kind of representative of more than just one tribe, such as the tribe of Levi.
But Jesus actually picked his disciples, didn't he?
Yeah.
They didn't come and ask if they could be a disciple.
With the 12, no, they didn't ask. They were called.
They were called. So
There were some people like who are mentioned in the Gospels who would come up to Jesus and they're like, "Hey, can I follow you?" And Jesus says, "Well, you have to do this and that, and then you can follow me." But for the 12, they were all called. That we know, anyways. All the ones that we have explicit calls for. Like we don't have an example of Thaddeus's call, for example.
Or what about Judas?
Yeah, we don't have an example of his call either. But yeah, for somebody say like Thaddeus, where the only things we know about him is he appears in the list of the 12. That's all we know. That's all the background we have.
So why do we differentiate between a pastor who is teaching and a Sunday school teacher who is often the women in the congregation who are teaching?
Because that's not the pastoral office in the sense. So when Paul is talking about the pastoral office, he's speaking directly to, are you teaching the congregation as a whole? And when Paul is later on in the letter to Timothy, so First Timothy, early on, he's saying, women cannot have authority over men because of such and such reasons. These are the qualifications for pastors. This is qualifications for deacons. Later on, he also talks about widows, and he's saying these things widows can do within the congregation, kind of giving them a purpose beyond just being widows. And part of that is teaching children. So we also have in the mind of Paul, like, yeah, instruction of people new to the faith is something that women can do. I mean, you even have an example of this with Apollos in Acts. So Apollos, I have to explain who on earth this guy is. Okay, so he comes to faith in possibly late adolescence, maybe early adulthood. So he'd still be recognized as somebody who could have authority in the church when he's coming into the faith. And he hears about Jesus, he's proclaiming it. And then there's a couple women who hear them and they go, "Oh, this isn't quite right." So they talk to Apollos, and they put him off to the side, and then they start teaching him like, this is what Jesus actually taught. And then Apollos like, "Oh, okay, sorry." And then Apollos corrects his teaching. And Apollos is one of the early preachers who goes out. So he's mentioned in 1 Corinthians as one of the teachers of the church in Corinth. So he did a lot of work there. But at that early stage, before he became, let's say, a pastor, for just use of terminology, he was instructed by women, but he wasn't instructed in public. He was instructed in private, and that would be more what Sunday school is you're instructing people who are growing up in the faith. You're not doing it in the public assembly, you're doing it with a specific group. So usually the question that gets asked in our circles is, well, what about a children's message in the sanctuary during the worship service, where a woman comes out and starts teaching the kids? Is she now exercising the preaching office over the entire congregation? I would say no, insofar as she's like, I don't think we're getting women in pastoral robes coming out and then teaching the entire congregation from the lectern with the kids right up there in front. Like, it's very clear that this person is not taking upon themselves the pastoral office. However, they are still speaking the truth of the Christian religion in the assembly, and that would also be similar to women lectors, like they're just reading the scriptures. and that's also kind of up for debate in our circles. Unfortunately, because sorry, I'm kind of going off on a tangent. But there are 2 documents in Lutheran Church Canada. They're both official documents for us, anyways. One of them is saying these are the roles of women in the church. Women in the church. So this is what women are able to do, and part of that is saying women are able to be lectors. So it right out says that. And then at the end, its recommendations is you shouldn't have anything that would confuse the pastoral office. So if you have somebody coming up in robes to read this as like a woman coming up in robes to read this from the lectern, then that would cause confusion. You don't do that. I don't think there's any confusion about who's coming up there. It's fine for me. But in the second document, which came out a few years later, it almost spoke against the first document, almost, where it's basically saying, these were the recommendations we had at the close, and some people thought that this gave them a green light for everything, so now we're going to say women shouldn't be lectors, because that's just going to cause confusion every time. I wish those documents were a little bit better worded to communicate its ideas. But from my point of view, as long as you clearly demarcate the pastoral office from what's not the pastoral office, so if you have elders who come up even, they're acting under the authority of the pastor, and they're also helping to say that this is more towards the pastoral office, say with distribution. We also know quite clearly from how they're dressed in a traditional service, they're not the pastor. But for women, yeah, they can help out during the service. They're not supposed to be preaching the sermon, but they can definitely help out. I think I went on way too many tangents. I think I've actually missed the point of what I was supposed to be speaking to.
Well, it's a little bit off the tangent, but
Yeah.
I mean, in today's environment,
Yeah.
how do you teach the kids that this isn't putting women down? Like, to me, it just sits normally.
Yeah.
I don't have to fully understand it. Seen it in my family. I understand in that
Yeah.
sense. Kids aren't seeing that. They're
No.
seeing it as discrimination and put down of women. And how do you?
Yeah, and this is to kind of put it into. So I've been watching some videos online about this sort of. Well, not this specifically. I've been watching some of the videos online which are talking about woke ideology, and I think a couple words that's kind of in some of those discussions would be useful to try and differentiate this. So there's equality and there's equity. Equality means that everybody's equal in circumstances. So you're starting out from a common point, and you have no discrimination against you. You can do whatever you want within the means. Equity tends to be more equalization of outcomes, not an equalization of opportunity. So equality is more opportunity, equity is outcomes. So if people are, and what's being promoted more so in our society today is equity. We need to have so many people of such and such a race or such and such a gender or such and such an orientation in all these positions, regardless of qualifications. Whereas if you have equality of opportunity, everybody should be able to apply for those positions, regardless of race, gender, or sexual orientation. Everybody should be able to apply for those opportunities, but you select the most qualified candidates. So for the Christian faith, we're actually looking more towards the equality of opportunity, where we're saying these are the qualifications for this specific vocation. Here you are. And part of that for the pastoral office would be you need to be a male. And it's not that we're letting any guy go into this, and nor should we. There are some people who should not be in the pastoral office by any means. Same thing with the Old Testament office. Only Levitical priests, so 1/12 of the nation, in terms of tribes, only men, so 1/24 now, and of suitable age, 148, and no physical defects. So at once you're saying only about maybe 1/50th of the nation can actually apply for this specific position. Same thing for if you want to become an astronaut. Part of the qualifications for that would actually be, well, you have to be of such and such a physical aptitude for this position. You can't have of any serious health defects, otherwise how can we sustain you in space? Or even in the army, like I can't join the army because I'm diabetic. And it makes sense to me. But I'm not going to start petitioning the government going, let the diabetics into the army, we need more diabetics in it, because it doesn't make sense. So with certain positions, you can say, well, you need to have this for the position. Now, everybody who's qualified will come into that position, but not everybody is qualified. Whereas if you say, well, we need people with all qualifications in all places, well, now you're kind of confusing what we actually need for these vocations. Because now you want people in there regardless of what that is actually purposed for.
I guess what the kids or modern ideas would be is, why does it have to be male? Why is that a qualification?
Yeah, and if we're going from the biblical perspective, this is because so St. Paul gives the reasons. Man was created first, then woman. So man automatically had the teaching office when he was created, because the woman came from him, and God had spoken to the man, now man spoke to the woman. So when she also fell in sin, and that's also Paul's second reason, is that historically women were deceived, the man was not deceived, the woman was. But since the man failed in his teaching vocation because he didn't curb his wife away from that, he also fell into sin. So he had a fault, but it was a different fault. Sorry, it's very similar, but slightly different. So Paul is looking at two specific historical events, saying this is how they were created, this is how they fell, and man was specifically created to be the head of the wife. So at once he's combining history with kind of biology, or what we would even call teleology, saying this is what's supposed to happen. Today's people don't like that because they don't want a specific purpose as determined by physiology or history. They just want everything to be as equitable as possible. So if you're trying to tell people about this is the historical factors that led to X, Y, Z, they want, well, let's reverse history. And to some extent we should, because if you have unfair practices brought against, for example, African Americans in the 50s for housing, so they couldn't get mortgages based on pretty much where they were, so they got terrible housing early on in the 50s, and since they don't have the what's the word that I'm looking for? Oh, assets. The assets to have better financial life later on. So as generations continue, this gets worse and worse and worse over time. You can actually see, yeah, that historical event should be reversed because that was against them racially at that time. So some historical events you can and probably should reverse. But if you're looking at some of the biological factors, it doesn't make too much sense to shift those because those are pretty much immutable. They're written into your DNA. You can't really change that unless you mutate yourself, and you're probably going to mutate yourself with a whole bunch of defects. So if we're looking to say, let's see, trying to think of a good example, but I'm just gonna go with one that's in the news, sports.
Yeah.
Men generally have greater height, greater length of their limbs, so even arm stretch. They have generally more muscle mass, so in sports, they're naturally predisposed to excelling more than women. Now, women in sports, they actually have greater joint ability. So I've heard that for climbers, the best team to have would be a man and a woman, because the man would be more qualified to support the weight of them, but the woman is better articulated to find all the little places in which to grab. So if she goes first to try and find all these places, then the man can actually follow her, but if she needs to go away, but the man can help support her if things go right. Anyways, but if you're running a race or something, the person with longer legs, more muscle mass is going to win. And if men, athletic people who are trained for this, men have natural advantage, they're just going to have a natural advantage. So that would be a biological asset that they would have, which cannot be reversed. Likewise, you wouldn't want somebody who is necessarily like my height as an astronaut. So I'm going back to that example. So you don't want somebody my height as an astronaut, because if you have an astronaut who's a head shorter than me and just as qualified, they should actually go up, because that's a lot less rocket fuel that you have to put that person into space.
You can cut your head off.
So yeah, there's different things that should be taken into consideration. Some of them people don't like because there are things they can't change, and people want to change the things that they can't change. And if you can't change history, now you can try to adapt to what went on in history. That's something that we're able to do. We can't reverse history, but we can adapt from it. Yeah, we can do that, but we can't necessarily change purpose that God has ordained for humanity along the line.
So was there anything in the Old Testament about women speaking in church?
In the assembly, no, nothing, because it didn't happen.
So it's
The only thing that I can think of would be some of the female prophets, because there weren't any female priests, but there were some female prophets.
How about
So
judge?
prophecies come up every once in a while.
Wasn't there a female judge?
Yeah, Deborah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she was a prophetess,
Mm-hmm.
and she could lead the people as a prophetess, but she didn't take the role of a priest in the sense that she did not offer up sacrifices to God for the forgiveness of the people, but she could still be a political and even to a degree religious leader in some sense. And that's more or less the distinction that we're trying to make, is that yes, women should be allowed to do stuff in the church, but we have to think carefully about what specific roles they can do. So pretty much every single congregation in Lutheran Church Canada, the most faithful and useful members will be the LWML.
Right.
Because they're women who really want their church to continue, and they really want to spread the word. So I love the LWML. I haven't met an LWML that I haven't liked in the congregation, because they're always very much geared towards spreading God's word. And they do that to the best of their abilities, and they really like to support their pastors to support the congregation. Sometimes they even make them mountains. But yeah, and that's an incredibly useful support role in the church. And that is one of the roles actually given to women at creation, is that they're the helper. Now, the helper isn't what you would call a subordinate role. That's not what that word means, but they're a complementary role. So the man has their specific role, the woman has their specific role. They're equal, but they're different.
Yeah, that's what every time I hear some of these arguments, I think, don't you know there's a difference between equal and same?
Yes,
That was when I'm dealing with the kids and their learning disabilities and
yeah,
the supports they were given, that was driven home, that in order to be equal, they have to be treated differently.
I know, well, it's one of those. It's equal in the
Equal and same aren't the same.
because that's one of the major issues that's actually being taught, and it came up years and years ago. Because there are different versions of the feminist movement. There's different strains of feminists. And I'm all for women having equal say in society, and women leaders, yeah, sure. We even have biblical precedent for that. Women helping out the church, yeah, sure, we have precedent for that. Women prophets, we don't really have prophets anymore, but if we have women prophets, we have women prophets. That they're just going to speak the word of God. But with different strains of feminism, like every once in a while, like there was, I remember back in the 90s, calls for, why do men get urinals? Why can't women's pee standing up? They should put urinals in women's bathrooms.
No, thank you.
Yeah, then there were people who researched this and put specific instructions to show how women could pee standing up. Okay, but I don't know if we really need that. Then you go further and further down the line to today, where equality equals same. And one of the and this is going to be very controversial. I'm sorry for everybody watching, but one of the arguments that I've been hearing from certain people who would be considered conservative is that when the pill was introduced, that it actually hurt women in the sense that you were making them more like men. Because before you were regulated by your own biology, but now with the pill, you weren't as regulated anymore. So you're more like men in the sense that you didn't have to be conscious of this monthly thing that you go through as much. And it was also the call for, that was one of the things leading into, well, now women are being told not to have children, encouraged not to have children, so you're also being like men where you're not bearing children. So men don't bear children, regardless of what some of the modern cultural movements are saying. But men don't bear children, now women don't have to bear children, so now you can be the same. And since there's no longer a clear definition for women, this is causing some strain. So, and this is the really weird thing, because when you go into some of the culture wars, like there's no real definition for women, but if you ask people what is a man, they'll give you a relatively straightforward answer, but you don't get a straightforward answer for women. To me, that's really weird, because they want the equal or the sameness there. So how do you define a woman? And some people will just say it's whoever decides that they're a woman, which is a circular definition and doesn't make any sense because you're defining woman by woman. So, I don't know if any of you've heard of the short film "What Is a Woman?" Matt Walsh. I don't agree with how Matt Walsh does a lot of things because he tends to be extremely polemic. But a lot of his ideas are not wrong. He just professes them in a poorly executed way, in my opinion. But in the movie, kind of a documentary movie, like he's interviewing a whole bunch of different.
No.
He's interviewing a whole bunch of people who would be experts on, or defined as experts from the more liberal side. So people who are involved in transgender surgeries, people who are counselors to this end, people who don't necessarily identify as man or woman, go to gender studies professors, and like all of them can't define a woman. They barely even tried it. The closest you actually get is a woman is whoever chooses to be a woman. And then when he says, well, I think a woman is this, and they go, no, only a woman gets to decide what they are. Like, but but okay, then what is that? And they're like, I don't know, I'm not a woman. Okay. But I won't go into that one. Oh no, I will bring this one up. But what is a cat? Well, a cat is this four-legged furry thing. It's like, are you a cat? No. Then how can you get to decide what a cat is, but you can't decide what a woman is unless you're and stuff like that. But really, the people could not really define it, and it's because and really is like you're trying to make them the same as men, but since you're also getting rid of sexuality in general, people don't really know what's going on. So
I don't know how we got onto this topic, sorry.
So if there was no women, there'd be no men.
That's right.
exactly. I actually want women to be which
I mean, Adam might have been here first, but.
no, yeah, I think Adam's statement is incredibly important because as soon as he sees Eve, he says, "Flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone. She shall be woman because she came out of man." Like flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone. Like he's saying that no, we are the same, but we're also different. Be called woman because she came out of man. So we have to recognize ourselves as extremely united in the flesh, and that we're not different, but we have dissimilarities.
Well, and also there is things that women can't do that men can, and vice versa.
Yes.
I know when I worked, I was in the meat department, and sometimes when I would ask the guys to carry something out for me that was really heavy, they'd always say, you voted to have equal rights, you do it. I mean, they were just being smart, they did it, but you know, they used to throw that up to me quite often. And I said, I didn't vote for equal rights, do it for me. But we've come a long way in the Lutheran Church, at least we have a vote now. Exactly.
Oh yeah, and that's something that we could actually do inside churches, because again, the question is just around the pastoral office, because the pastoral office, as defined by Scripture, is given to men specifically, but the administrative office is not given to men specifically. So if you have the pastoral office independent of the administrative arm, then you could have women voting on things, you can have women congregational presidents.
You can't have women as president?
Yeah, as long as your constitution is
allows it,
separates the administrative arm from the pastoral office.
but not an elder.
Oh, not again, you have to define what an elder is. It's kind of a wishy-washy term throughout the churches, but as we understand elders here, which are extensions of the pastoral office. So elders are those who are under the pastor, under his supervision for guidance of worship and spiritual activities. Then a man has to be an elder. Like you can't have women elders here. But there are some churches who define elders in a completely different way. I think that is incredibly confusing when they do. But if you define an elder in a completely different way, then you can't actually do that. I think that usually those definitions are leaning more towards what you would actually call a deacon or a deaconess, where they just look after some of the people in the congregation. So women visiting people in the congregation, seeing how they're doing and stuff like that. And I think that we actually should have women doing that too. There's also an incident in one of the congregations I was doing field work in, where so I was doing field work in church with 2 male pastors and deaconess, and somebody was coming up to them and wanted somebody to listen to her, and she went and spoke to the deaconess because it was an issue that she felt far more comfortable speaking to a woman about. Now the deaconess wasn't trying to act out the part of the pastoral office, but she was still being somebody who was a faithful member of the church, helping out a fellow member of the church. Were she to try to administer sacraments to that person, it would be a completely different conversation. but she was there in her capacity as a fellow Christian to help.
I think it's probably confusing to some people too, that like with our church, we have different rules than some of the other Lutheran churches. Because some of the other Lutheran churches do have women priests and stuff.
They're not exactly.
Well, because I was listening on Sunday when Sopherd was telling me that they went to church in Matsqui. It's just a little Lutheran church, which I remember because I went to school right across from the school was right across from the church. And she was saying, oh, they had a lovely woman bishop. And I said, oh, I said, but that wasn't our synod.
That's not our synods.
But she didn't realize that our church doesn't have women priests and stuff.
Yeah.
So
See, this is why people need to go to Bible study.
If they see here Lutheran church, they figure, well, we're all the same.
No.
Differences are getting worse.
No, yeah, some of those. Because in very general and secular terms, conservatives, moderates, liberals in Lutheranism. Those are the three generic types of synods that you might have. We would be more in the conservative camp, aka the confessional Lutherans. The moderates will be annoyed that I use that, but we're the confessional ones. But we wouldn't allow women pastors because we would say that, well, according to Scripture, doesn't have this. The moderates would allow female pastors, but they wouldn't allow, say, homosexuality or other things of that sort. Because while they can try and argue around Scripture in terms of the male preaching office, they can't nor do they want to argue around all the texts condemning homosexuality and other sexual orientations. The liberal camp, they just keep moving and moving and moving however the culture wants them to, because they're along with the culture. So you have pretty much anything goes with, and it started with women's ordination, then it went to homosexuality, then it went to transsexuality, and I don't know where it's going to end up, but it won't end up anywhere. But
Do you think it started with women's ordination, or did it start with an overemphasis of the social doctrine, the do good to others?
Yeah. So the social justice. Yeah, that's a good point. I think that they were kind of coinciding in the sense that the major social justice issue that kind of broke the whole thing was women's ordination. Because at the time that the social justice issue was coming up, that was about when the civil rights movement was in its heyday. So with African Americans, like, they got more stuff. You could say that they didn't get all the way that they should have gotten, but anyways, they were recognized better than they were before, at least. And then there's more calls for, well, women's rights. And that's kind of where the social justice issue came up, and it was starting a lot with women in ministry. And so they're kind of going hand in hand, but if we're thinking about logically prior, it would be in the social justice movement, absolutely.
Okay, I think you better pray, because otherwise I'm gonna have to go out anyway.
Anyway, yeah, so I'll very, very quickly. So that was kind of the issue that came up. So when you started getting some of the Lutheran synods who were emerging around that time, the ones that made the major body in the US, the ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, you had one of the three major synods that were coming together. They allowed women's ordination. So when all of them came together, all of them now allowed women's ordination. So that's when a few groups of the congregations of those bodies that didn't allow it broke off, so that they could still practice what they wanted. It's also why the Missouri Synod didn't go in with that merger. And It was a good thing too, because as time went on with the civil rights movement, which was then now going more towards homosexuality, having more rights towards homosexuality, since they already allowed women's ordination, we're already focusing on social justice as the underlying idea. They gradually accepted it around when Canada was accepting it. And then when you have the rest of the LGBT stuff coming in, that's when they, yeah, so it keeps moving, but it's basically following culture and it's following, the social justice movement. But kind of started with women's ordination in terms of chronology, not necessarily logically right.
Okay, let us pray.
Yes. Well,
Sorry.
thank you, Lord Jesus Christ, for being with us in our study of you and your word. We ask you, Lord, to always guide us by your word, that we do what is right and proper among us. And we ask you, Lord, to help us defend your word when it comes into question in our world today, and even within our own congregation. And whenever it does, we ask you, Lord, to always enlighten us by the Holy Spirit, to guide us, and to bring us exactly where we need to be. In the name of our Lord, your Son, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
Unfortunately, the conservative side is getting smaller though, isn't it? Not growing.
Maybe I'll keep recording a little bit. Okay. This is one of the interesting things with today's society now, because we might be hitting a breaking point soon. So the conservative side is shrinking, yes, but now we're getting more diversity in who believes what, because not everybody's going along with the bandwagon now. So with the LGBTQ movement, and I'm just going to focus on that as kind of one of the examples. The homosexuals didn't at the beginning necessarily agree with some of the stuff the transsexuals were saying. Oh yeah, nice. Because, well, one of the phrases that was going on near the beginning was "we're born that way." That was the homosexual slogan. Transsexual slogan is "we're not born that way. We have to change." So that was some of the initial gratingness as at the beginning. But as time moved on, they just decided, well, we should keep banding together because we can still lobby as a larger group. But now things are also starting to be breaking points where there are so many groups within LGBTQ that it isn't really exactly a community. There's a whole group of communities, and they're not all always agreeing on what things should be. And this is where you get a whole bunch of cancellations of people in other groups because nobody can agree on what narrative to go on, even necessarily week after week. Now, the issue is coming up more so with transsexuality in recent years because of its targeting of children, youth and children. Now, it was somewhat unthinkable that people had even allowed to get to that point, but now that it's starting to target children and even try to move them away from their parents, people are realizing this is not good. So one of the lovely things I saw in the news recently was one of the premiers going way out east in Canada decided not to allow legislation to go forward in his province that would keep sexual transitioning secret from parents within schools. He banned that. He's like, nope, I'm not letting this pass. And I'm like, thank you, merciful Lord. We need to keep the parents involved. Now, some of those parents, they might allow their children to transition, but as long as we try to protect the family, this is what we want as Christians. We want to protect the family, and from the family, we can actually work from there. But now that it's coming after children, more people are realizing this is very scary. And I don't think the breaking point with the ideologies is going to come necessarily soon, because I think we still have to get to some of the other perversions before that, which are starting to come up. more and more anyways. And I actually did this talked about this in a very recent devotional I did on some of the sexual prohibitions in Leviticus. But as we start, or as the society starts moving more towards bestiality and pedophilia, I think that's when we're going to start reaching a breaking point, and then people start saying, no, this is actually insane, and we're actually going to have the pendulum start swinging the other way. But unfortunately, I still think we're a few years out from having the pendulum start swinging.
We're gonna go down, further downhill before we
Yeah,
get to
So-
the bottom.
but we're heading there already.
People are starting to complain, non-Christians are kind of sitting up and saying,
But if you see some of the clips from Pride Parades, I don't go looking for this, but in the news sometimes it comes up. There's more and more representation of people who are identifying as animals or sexuality with animals.
furries.
Oh my.
No, furries were something a little bit different. Now they're going way, way past that. But also with the targeting of children with transsexuality and actively sexualizing children. Pedophilia is going to come in as more of a breaking point, because the pedophiles have been saying for years, going on the same talking points as transsexuality, that, hey, why shouldn't we allow people of such and such an age to be guided in their sexuality, and we as adults can help them do that, because they're pedophiles and they want to explore in very specific capacities. But people were dismissing that, but now we keep moving closer and closer with some of these alternative lifestyles, which are, to be quite honest, inhuman. Quite literally with bestiality, but
Well,
still.
I've got so many initials on it now that I.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's why they have the
Awesome.
plus sign on there, the asterisk.
They gave up trying to list
Oh, yeah,
everybody.
they gave it up a while ago, but depending on, that's also where you have the groups within the community. This is not a community, LGBTQ communities everywhere, a whole bunch of groups. So some of them will keep two S in there, some will have the Q, some won't have the Q, some will add on other letters that I can't even remember. I think somebody came up with a Greek character at some point. I don't know. I really don't know. Anyways, so this is going on, and this is kind of the social justice movement that allowed it to happen. But there are a whole bunch of other stuff that I can't divulge into right now that would also be factoring into this.
I noticed the Church of the Cross didn't have all their flags out for gay week.
Oh,
Yes,
it's Pride Month.
Oh, is it month? But
Yeah.
other years they had a lot more rainbows and rainbow flags, like things out than they have. That I noticed this
I
year.
mean, we used to attend there. I raised ELCIC. I drive past there and I just, every time
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
a bit of a tear,
So-
you know, like, oh, how.
Yeah, and some of the congregations are, like, if you're in a remote enough area, some of the congregations are still actually very biblical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The issue, though, is that those particular synods realize, hey, these people aren't on the bandwagon.
So they say.
So yeah, they started intentionally sending all the women ordinance specifically to those rural congregations. Yeah, so you have to receive a woman pastor if you're part of the ELCA, or ELCA in those rural areas, because they want to make sure they're on brand. Anyway,
I have a cousin that's a pastor.
so
No,
anyways,
it's kind of-
sorry
my mom's
for
like
everybody
that,
watching this
so,
recording with doom
you
and
know,
gloom.
they're-
Yeah.
And this very weird tangent that we went on. However, this is something that we should be talking about, and yes, it does just sprout from the question of women's ordination, as Linda pointed out, and it does come up of the social justice and replacing the message of the gospel with law, basically. Like, what can we do to facilitate people rather than how can we serve best? Some people will confuse those two, unfortunately. But that's where we get to where we're at.